Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today I'm very excited to have Kashif Khan with us. Kashif is the CEO of the world's leading functional genomics researcher, the DNA company. Having conducted the largest study of its kind in the world, Kashif's team clinically reviewed 6,000 patients through a genomic lens to understand why we get chronic diseases. With investors like Dave Asprey and advisors like Dr. BJ Fogg, the DNA company has been able to go beyond insights to instructions by also curating genetically mapped solutions and designing the behavioral change programs people need to implement their genomic findings. Kashif, it's so great to have you on the show.
No, it's awesome to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm impressed that you have Dave Asprey as an investor. He's a client of mine, and BJ Fogg as an advisor. BJ was a guest. He's a friend of mine and a
Oh,
past
cool.
guest on this podcast. So yeah, it's a small world.
Yeah,
So,
Dave, I chased him around at a conference. I literally found out where he was going to be. I flew there and I said, we need him to know what we do. This is early days. And so I literally followed him around with a tube in my hand saying, please spit in this, sir, if you can. He said, who are you and why are you following me? And eventually he did the test and he said that now I understand why you're pushing so hard because he had done every DNA test in the world at that point. And I mean, we can get into it, but he was blown away and he ended up becoming an investor because he loved what we did so much.
Wow. So I've done multiple DNA tests myself. I've done not only 23andMe and Ancestry.com, but also full genomic sequencing for this was in preparation for IVF,
Right.
for for
For
having
fertility.
our baby who's almost 2 now, and I also had Health Nucleus, which does
Right.
a genomic test and get 95+% of your
Yes.
genome sequenced, and that's apparently pretty unusual even amongst genome sequencing companies. So I'm curious, what is the difference maker for you
So
and
we've
your
we've
company?
done the opposite. And this is where, the belief has been more is better, right? If I can sequence the entire genome, I'm going to learn a lot, which potentially makes sense because you've got 22,000 genes in your body to decode, right? But how much action do we actually derive from each of those 22,000 genes? What we said is the way the body works is not 22,000 independent genes doing 22,000 independent functions. We already understand biochemistry. We understand the cardiovascular system, the endocrine system, mood and behavior, what's going on with neurochemicals firing. We really need to focus there if we're going to solve the big problems.
Mhm.
So where you describe, for example, perfect example with IVF, you're looking for a very specific thing that solves a very specific genetic problem. Genetic companies have done a really good job of that. Sickle cell syndrome, fertility issues, etc. There's sort of hardcore diagnostic tests that drill straight into a problem, give you an answer, and things become very black and white, right? Meanwhile, that's a very small part of our healthcare burden. Chronic disease, 90% of what we spend our money on and got pain from, is the bulk, right? It's literally Center for Disease Control says it's 90%. Genetics has never touched that because there's no direct, I'm born with type 2 diabetes, I'm born with cholesterol problem. These are things that happen over time. You know better than anyone. You adopt them from the mistakes you make, the wrong choices.
Yeah.
Our thinking is, how do we bring this full genome scanning down to 50, 100 genes that are actually actionable, where if I were to focus there, I could prevent diabetes, cholesterolemia, Alzheimer's, dementia, et cetera, all the big problems, female hormone issues, menopause problems, all that stuff. And this is what we've done in what you mentioned by studying the 6,000 people one by one by one. We've understood when a DNA test says you have 80% chance of Alzheimer's. Okay, well, am I 80 or am I 20? Really, all you gave me was anxiety.
Right.
Why did the people with the same genetic profile, 80% of them got it and 20% didn't? That's what we focused on. What were the choices, the environment, nutrition, lifestyle choices of the 20% that didn't get sick with the exact same genetic profile? So that's where we took it from sort of insights to instruction. We now understand, okay, if you have that suboptimal genetic profile, you're still not 100% guaranteed to have an issue until you do the wrong things that that profile can't cope with. That's what we kind of unlocked. And now it's the ability to say, if you're sick, let's reverse it. Let's stop treating it. And if you're not sick, let's prevent it because we know why it's going to happen. That's what we did.
Mm. Now, in your bio, it says that this study was the largest of its kind in the world.
Right. Yeah.
Are there others that are being worked on now to make yours the second largest?
Well, see, the thing is that genetic companies don't think this way. They think that they are, if you look at any of the investor presentations, any of their websites, even some of the biggest genetic companies in the world, right on their websites, it says, hey, we deal with this cardiovascular problem. This is 4% of cardiovascular, 96% is lifestyle choices. So they're saying right on their website that we don't even believe we can do anything there, right? The thing is that when the science of genetics is all focused on understanding genes, right? It's not about understanding biochemistry, people, humans, and illness. It's about the genes and what are the genes doing. And so, yes, there are other studies like this out there, but only focusing on one problem at a time, saying, let's take, 200 Icelandic people and figure out why they have an obesity problem, right? Very specific target, because what is the goal? What drug can I make? That's the goal. Personalized medicine. I want to know what drug I can make, and what it's not about how do I teach people why they actually get cholesterol problems and how they can reverse or prevent it. So yeah, in terms of even how we think to begin with, it's so different that we're gone in a completely different direction.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay. And what are some success stories that you're allowed to share with our listener or
Well,
viewers?
so going back to what I just said, cholesterol, which is really helps paint the picture of genetics versus functional genomics. So genetics is I see this gene, you have a variation of it, a SNP, a spelling mistake in the gene, which now puts you in the 60% bucket of risk for cholesterol issues, right? That's a potential outcome you could have in a DNA test.
Mhm.
Now you're said, okay, well, I guess it's more likely it's like inherited. My parents had it, I'm going to have it too. It's taken for granted that this thing is just more likely to happen. What's not understood is why does it happen? Right? Why did 60% get it and 40% didn't? So we start there and say cholesterolemia isn't a disease you're born with. Why does it happen? We have to take a step back and say it's cholesterol itself isn't the problem. If you look at the 60% who are more likely, they typically had a weaker endothelial lining. So the heart disease typically doesn't happen in the heart. It usually happens in the arteries around the heart. They get calcified, they get blocked, they get cholesterol buildup, etc. And then boom, heart attack. The heart's still pumping right until that moment, right? So what we find in those people is the endothelial line, that inner lining of the artery, that where the blood actually flows and touches.
Mhm.
There's different versions: stainless steel, somewhat robust, and then paper thin. If you have the paper thin version, which is genetically predeterminable, most reports, as I told you, will just put you in that bucket that's clinically studied of, oh, these people got more heart disease. Why do they get it? Because that endothelium is more prone to inflammation because it's so weak. But what would then cause inflammation, which gives you the 60 or the 40, right? Some of those people did too much cardiovascular exercise and exposed themselves to oxidants. Just the process of going through heavy cardiovascular output makes you breathe more oxygen, produce more oxidants. Some people can cope, some people can't. Being exposed to chemicals, working around paints, being in construction, golfing too much, breathing in pesticides for 3-4 hours at a time, several days a week, that your body can. Many sources of why I would get inflammation here, right? Now
That
that
didn't
we,
even occur to me about golf being
yeah,
a hazard to your health.
well,
Wow.
imagine what does it take to make that course so beautiful? It's heavy use of chemicals. Some people, when they finish golfing, have brain fog and they're tired the next day. Why does that happen? Because the next step, we've understood that somebody may have the weak endothelial alignment, but guess what? Your detox system is meant to clear this stuff, so it shouldn't matter, right? Glutathionization, methylation, these are the processes that help you support those toxic insults. But then guess what? Again, people have different versions genetically of their capacity to detox. You could actually be completely missing the key important detox genes. Forget about a SNP or variation. You might not even have it. It's one of the few genes where you can have what's called a copy number variation. I literally don't have the gene. I don't have the instructions. Now imagine that person who has that weak or poor paper thin endothelial lining, that inner lining of the artery wall. They also had the bad detox system where when they breathe in those chemicals or the paints or the mold or they're doing too much, oxidation, there's too much oxidative stress on them. It's just free flowing in the blood because they're not getting rid of it. They're then causing damage, scratches, abrasions to this endothelial lining, which causes it to get inflamed, for which the body is supposed to respond with an anti-inflammatory response. Well, then again, guess what? Some people have a weak genetic capacity to deal with methylation or anti-inflammatory response. What is the body's response to inflammation in the arterial system, in the endothelial? It's to actually deploy cholesterol as a hormone to mitigate and reduce the inflammation. So if you do the wrong thing for 20, 25 years, on day one, it's not a problem. Day 500, maybe there's a bit of a problem. Day 5,000, when you're a few years into it, you start to have, I'm crossing that threshold where now there's so much cholesterol where the doctor starts to say my cholesterol levels are high and they start giving me a pill. Right. Meanwhile, what was actually happening? My body is deploying the cholesterol to try and reduce the inflammation that I'm causing by my poor and mismatched environment, nutrition, and lifestyle choices. This is what we've mapped out by studying people to say, why did it even happen? Okay, you're taking a pill for cholesterol. Why did your body decide to put the cholesterol there in the first place? Let's deal with that. Right. And those things are all genetic. We can test a 5-year-old kid and tell you what their risks are now that we've understood by studying these people. So that's where we brought things to.
Wow. Now, one thing I understand now that I didn't understand early on in my life was that the bad cholesterol is potentially bigger and more buoyant for some people and small and dense and wedging into the epithelial lining much more easily, therefore, in some people. And therefore, it depends on the size of your bad cholesterol and the density of it, which they can check with NMR.
Yes.
To determine whether those numbers that you're getting, as far as bad cholesterol versus good cholesterol, whether that is something to be concerned about or not. But you've taken this to a whole other level, though.
Yeah, we're saying so. So first of all, that's absolutely true, right? You can actually go get tested for this if you want, and this is becoming quite commonplace in functional medicine, at least not in mainstream, but functional. Where here's a thing that's a bit of a better scan. It's not just about cholesterol. What kind of cholesterol, right? So what happens with cholesterol when it meets toxicity? It actually hardens. So that HDL, LDL process, like send the cholesterol, bring it back, which is how it works. It doesn't come back because when it meets its toxicity, it actually hardens and gets deposited. Now, to what degree does it affect the endothelial? Again, goes back to what size is the molecule, right? So if you start to layer on all these different insights, you can become so precise. And you can literally predict that if you do this, here's the day you're getting a cholesterol issue. If you don't do this, you will never have a cholesterol issue. So that personalization is really the key of what we're trying to drive. Take these insights, no more trial and error, no more one size fits all, which we understand to get to where we are in medicine today, we needed to go through that. We needed to develop the science. We needed to go through this trial and error stuff to see what works. But guess technology is better now. We're ahead of that in technology. So let's start adapting it. This is the exact case. Keep stacking those personalization insights. It's not just DNA, it's also microbiome. It's also scans like you're talking about. It's the Doppler and staying ahead of things. DNA is who you were born as. It's literally your instruction manual. All these other tests is a stamp in time. Where are you today? Which tells you where you need to focus, the red flags. So you need both.
Right. And earlier on in our conversation, you said, well, those companies that give you the full genomic testing, it's too much and it's not actionable enough. They're not connecting all the dots and leading you to make behavior change choices to then rectify these situations. Now, there is one company that comes to mind. Maybe it's a competitor, maybe it's more co-opetition, but it's Simplified Genetics. I had Kurt Johnson, the founder, on this podcast a few years ago, and he talked about they only check a very small number of genes, and then they make some recommendations based on the analysis of those genes. Like, for example, the way that you should exercise, the way you should eat is based on your genetics, which they figure out through this test. and then they recommend how much aerobic versus anaerobic exercise to do. They recommend what sort of mix of carbs with proteins and so forth you should have based on your certain genes that they're checking.
Right.
How does that fit into what you guys are up to at the DNA company?
So I'm not familiar with that company, but it sounds like they're doing the right thing, which is they're taking from what DNA. So what was the promise of DNA? That we're gonna unlock this thing inside of us, literally our instruction manual, and healthcare, or I should say sickness, should disappear. But that's kind of like this high pie in the sky, like what we thought we were gonna get. So it went in the direction of, well, we found that now that we've unlocked the genome, there's problems that are genetic based. Again, going back to sickle cell syndrome, some forms of childhood development, like autism, for example. There's a switch that you're looking for to turn on or off, that magic gene that if we find it, we can turn it off with a therapeutic, and that problem is now resolved. Right? So the science went in that direction. So the people that think the way the other gentleman you're talking about think were far and few between, because the funding, the momentum all went down this path of let's build drugs that solve specific problems, right? That's why even the biggest consumer tests, their true customer isn't really the patient. It's about the Glaxo or Pfizer buying the data in the background. So their tests are designed not for how do I give my client the best output, it's how do I collect the most data. Right? I want to stack as many genes as possible because that's what Glaxo literally is asking for, as opposed to how do I mine this to give you the most information from what you've given me, which is your code, your genetic code, right? So they're going in the right direction, and this is where we find, to speak to like categories, yes to diet nutrition, and diet nutrition is not just about what do I eat in terms of carbs, fats, micronutrients, macronutrients, which is all true. You can find that from your DNA. I mean, how do I metabolize fats and carbs? Am I actually is a keto diet going to kill me, as an example, because I don't metabolize fats well? And we have people like that the first month they feel amazing, then 2 months into it, they're kind of sluggish and groggy. They can't figure out what's going on. Vegans, we found that there's one gene responsible for breaking down, your main protein sources like beans, lentils, legumes on a vegetarian diet, and there's different versions. So I can't tell you how many vegans who are suffering. We've had to tell you can't eat like this. It's not designed for you. But there's others that it's perfectly suited for them, right? So diet nutrition is a big one, but it's also about the brain. How do I even perceive food? Am I an addict? Am I a binger? Do I graze every time I walk by the pantry? Do I lean on food as a coping mechanism because of stress? These things are all predetermined. So then that takes us to mood and behavior, which is the second big category. How is my brain wired? Right? And if I have your DNA, without speaking a word to you, I can tell you how you deal with emotion, stress. Do I have to be careful because you're going to be irritable? Can I be very straight? And do you prefer to be very frank and straightforward because your brain just moves very quick? Are you going to experience PTSD and trauma if I cause you pain? All this is genetically predetermined. So imagine knowing that not only about yourself, but about your team, your family, your spouse, etc. The third one is fitness and hormones. So fitness, yes, cardio and weight training, all that, but also body development. How many women are struggling with, doesn't matter what I eat, how I exercise, I just can't lose this weight. Well, that sounds like it's more hormones than anything else. And if you understood your genetics, you would understood how to actually burn fat, how to actually put on muscle, what time of day even to exercise. It's all predetermined genetically. Then we dive deep into cardiovascular because we believe that's the number one killer, first of all, but it's also the lowest hanging fruit in terms of how to very easily prevent and reverse disease. So cholesterolemia, diabetes, dementia, stroke, Alzheimer's, all those things we kind of bundle up into arterial or cardiovascular health, everything to do with the vasculature, right? Then we look at immunity and detox. There's 6 in total, by the way. We look at immunity and detox, which is really your anti-inflammatory response. If you were to have any load on you, whether it's illness, virus, Lyme disease, autism, whatever it is, to what degree do you express? Why do some people get Lyme disease and don't even know? Some are in a bed with a flu, and some are, for 6 months, they just can't get around. They can't do anything other than stay in bed. It's the ability to cope and fight, right? So it's not the virus itself, different versions. It's how does my body deal with it? And the last one is sleep. This is a huge issue. And it's now, I think 50% of Americans don't sleep properly, have chronic sleep. Either I can't fall asleep, or I wake up in the middle of the night after 3 hours, or I sleep 8 hours, but I wake up feeling like I didn't sleep at all. Those are three different problems. Genetically, we've understood why. And here's a simple example. I can't fall asleep, right? Okay, there's a gene called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Its primary purpose is that to produce BDNF, which is a known substance that people talk about in terms of mood. Its primary purpose is actually concussion. It drives neuroplasticity, so it helps you recover from concussion quickly because your neuroplasticity is just that much more aggressive in its capacity. It also deals with mood. So the people that are sort of, call it the drama queens, that everything means a lot and they overreact, and they're the people that will slam a door or yell or walk out of a meeting. They typically have the low version of BDNF. That same gene also determines how well you cope with circadian rhythm. Does your body know that it's nighttime? Right? Do you need to teach your body that it's time to sleep as opposed to just intuitively know? The people that just lie down and within minutes they're asleep versus I'm rolling. So for that person, we can now at a personalized level say, you need to turn your laptop off 2 hours before going to sleep. You need to turn your pot lights down, right? You need to not eat stimulatory foods. You need to not be exposed to stress or stimulation. There's a whole bunch of things we can tell them that without taking a pill, they will actually sleep better because their body just needs to know it's sleepy time, right? So those are the six big buckets that we dwell in. There's so many more, but these are the six that we feel like kind of everybody needs to go to. So we put them in the core product, but beyond that, you name a chronic issue, whether it's fibromyalgia, fertility, as you mentioned, breast cancer, etc. There's insights in all of this stuff.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So if, like for me, I'm not getting great sleep scores with my Aura ring, and
Right.
it's saying I'm getting maybe an hour and a half of deep sleep and maybe an hour of REM sleep a night, and
Right.
total sleep maybe 7 hours. And I might get a score. The other day, 2 days ago, it was 52. It was terrible. And today it was a whopping 70 something. It's like, which is better than a lot of days. But it's like I've almost become numb to it because the scores are so terrible. I just I'm not excited to check my sleep score, and it's so rare that I see the little icon of the crown. I'm just like,
Right.
I can't remember last time I saw that one.
And this is exactly why there are new versions of our reports the way we did, because if I just tell you you're more likely to have a sleep issue, and these are the reasons, and here's the genes, again, that all that leaves you is with that kind of experience. Well, I'm losing motivation. I don't even want to wear the ring anymore, right? As opposed to now that we've understood what your personal issues are, here's what you should do about it, right? So we're actually speaking now to Aura Ring because we said, okay, you're helping people manage and guide and coach themselves through how important is even sleep to begin with. First of all, 5 years ago, nobody even talked about it, right? And now how do I track? Okay, now that I've tracked, and a person like you, I've understood there's a problem. Okay, we can now, you still don't know what's going wrong, right? You know there's something wrong, but you don't know what. You don't know what to fix. That's where the genetics can come in and say, well, at least you've triaged and said that now I actually know I need to do this deep dive. I have a problem that doesn't seem to be going away. Let's work on what do I do? What do I do starts with what's wrong. What's wrong starts with where am I suboptimal genetically? Then you can determine the next best step to actually make this work, and then your sleep scores go through the roof. We've done this with a lot of patients, sort of more bespoke, hands-on, and we're now talking to these guys about putting a program together formally.
Very cool. I'm excited for that to come out.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome.
Very nice. Yeah. Now, you'd mentioned a few minutes ago vegans and how you may or may not be genetically capable of being vegan,
Right.
depending on your genetic makeup. So how does that impact somebody like myself who wants to be vegan for animal rights and
Yes.
cruelty reasons, and not just because of health?
Yes, exactly. And this is where, if you know the what and the why, then you know what to do about it, right? So I've had this conversation with my own cousin who is a vegan and has the same concerns as you, right? So I said there's a question of health where you got to do what your DNA and what all these tests are saying. Then there's a question of social, moral responsibility and a lifestyle decision. That's where you have to blend in other factors, and it goes beyond just the output of a report, right? So in this conversation with him, I showed him, here's the various problems you have. So I'm not telling you to stop being a vegan. I'm telling you have to address each one of these problems because this is what the vegan lifestyle is causing you, the net effect. But now that you know, you can now deal with them each independently in a different way. It doesn't have to be a diet shift. As an example, the thing that I mentioned, the FUT2 gene, it's one of your methylation genes, anti-inflammatory response. If you have the suboptimal version, you don't do well with, there's how many vegans complain about like bloating and gassiness from their food. It's this one gene that creates the enzymes that actually break down beans, lentils, legumes, chickpeas. Me personally, if I eat hummus for lunch, I can't eat dinner that day because I get so bloated. But I love it. I love hummus, right? I just can't eat it because I get bloated because I also had the weak version of FUT2. So that's one. So knowing that, you have to adjust your protein source. You have to say that, okay, well, I can't not have my proteins and I am a vegan. So I have to work on maybe tempeh or something else that isn't that, right? The second thing is muscle retention. We find that a lot of people that are vegan, you're nice and slim and look healthy, but some people also want to have, you know, they want to be on social media showing how look good they look, et cetera, et cetera. And
six packs, abs.
yeah, yeah, or even an 8-pack if you get there, who knows? But you know, it's the question of, okay, am I getting the micronutrients for my vegan diet, which I need? And then some people say, well, okay, I'm not eating meat, so I'm going to take a B12 supplement, right? Well, guess what? Genetically, there's some people that take a B12 supplement, swallow it, and just pee it out.
Right.
Because your ability, did your ancestors eat beef or did they eat goat? If your ancestors ate beef, then they probably do metabolize and absorb B12 from the gut. If they ate more goat and sheep, which if you go back a couple hundred years, was the majority of people. Cows were typically not killed because it was too expensive. It was the source of dairy, right? So very few groups actually ate beef. They more ate goat and lamb as their red meat source. And that is it's actually broken down and absorbed right in your mouth under the tongue. It's like a sublingual tablet, right? So if you're taking the wrong version of B12 as a vegan, you're not supposed. So it's not a question of, hey, you need to eat meat to get B12. You need to make sure you're taking the right version of the supplement. And then even then, there's different versions of B12. There's a methylated version and non-methylated. So which one do you actually need? Very important consideration for a vegan because B12 is like your core anti-inflammatory macronutrient for that person that has that weak endothelial lining that doesn't have enough B12. It's not just I can't put on muscle or whatever the other issues are. It's I'm actually going to have a heart attack because I have no anti-inflammatory response. My B complexes are what support that, right? Then we go to
So this is the MTHFR gene that you're talking about.
It's actually there's two genes. The MTHFR is your main methylation gene. And this is another thing we do very uniquely, which we didn't mention earlier. Gene by gene interpretation will only ever get you to, you got 70% chance of this probability, right? You have to look at what we call pathway interpretation, meaning methylation isn't a bunch of independent genes. It's a system. We understand step by step what happens in the metabolization of B vitamins, then the micronutrients used in methylation. So we've built the map that mirrors that. And there's one, so you could have the worst MTHFR and the best everything else upstream and downstream, and you have no problem, right? We actually have a parent with an autistic child who was told it's not possible for your child to be autistic because they have the good MTHFR gene, what they call the autism gene, right? But everything else was suboptimal. They weren't absorbing their B vitamins or so we literally just switched their B complex and to a sublingual very specific version, and their child completely changed.
Wow.
It was a completely different gene. And this is actually the CEO of Autism Hope Alliance, who then got us into Autism Hope Alliance, said that every parent needs to know this. But anyway, going back to the vegans.
Wow, that is so important.
It's hugely
just that
important.
little piece that you shared can change people's lives who are listening and have autistic family members. It's amazing.
Just this example. So Kristen, her son, she's the CEO of Autism Hope Alliance. Autism Hope Alliance. It was a 2-hour regimen to get her son from out of bed to ready in the morning. And she said it completely disrupted her life because she'd have to go to work late, all this stuff. So she went from that to her son making his own breakfast, tying his own shoelaces, and just doing his thing in a normal time in a matter of weeks. Right?
Wow.
She was just about to send him for stem cell treatment in South America because she didn't know what else to do. And he didn't need it. All he needed was the right B complexes, which he did not have the genetic capacity to absorb. And at some point down the line, he was probably exposed to the wrong toxins that caused him neural inflammation that he could not cope with, that led to this damage, literally. Right? So he wasn't born with a thing called autism. He was exposed to the wrong load environmentally at the wrong time for which he was not genetically designed to cope with. And at his young age, it led to neural inflammation.
Right. And that exposure could be in any number of different forms. It
Yes.
may or may not be a vaccine. It may or may not be something in the air that the child is breathing. It could be something that they eat. It could, like, I don't know, they end up consuming heavy metals perhaps in their fish. And yeah.
Could be anything. And just the right exposure at the wrong time. Vaccines, an example. Every pharma company argues, we've tested this up, down, left, right, center. The vaccine does not cause autism, which is true, right? The parents also say, that's the day my kid changed, which is also true, right? So what's happening? What's happening is you can test the active molecule as much as you want, and it's true that it doesn't cause a disease, but they're only looking for 20% of kids that are under this autism umbrella, the spectrum, are actually born with something. This is according to our numbers from what we've seen. About 20%, they have something, they're born with it, right? And that's what the pharma companies are referring to as, we don't cause that. It's true, they're born with that thing. 80%, the much bigger number, were not born with a problem. They adopted something over time because their detox pathway was horrible. They couldn't clear the load. Their anti-inflammatory response was horrible. And they're at an age where neurologically they were highly susceptible. Right? And so these kids, when they get the vaccine, the active molecule doesn't cause them a problem, but it's all the heavy metals in that serum that you're injecting 2-3 of these things at the same time. And all of a sudden they don't have the ability to clear any of those heavy metals, wreaking havoc on the neurological system, leading to literally brain damage, which then gets put into the bucket of autism because they express with the same behaviors. Right? So that's where that argument, both sides are correct. But we now have a better idea of what's actually going on. So let's go deal with it better, right? At least spread them out, at least have a detox support, with the vaccine, something along those lines. So
yeah, and one point I want to make, that in case our listener doesn't understand how vaccines work, it's important to have an adjuvant into the in the serum so that it creates an immune response, because just injecting either kind of deactivated virus or portions of a virus, like an inactive part of a code of the virus or whatever, isn't going to generate the immune response required without that adjuvant.
Yes, exactly. And that's the problem, is you need it, but it's not the vaccine itself is not the source, it's how it's made. And every parent is right that that's the day my kid changed. You can't argue with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's just an example of how we've dealt with things there. But sorry, to go back to your question about the beginning.
Yeah, that was such an important sidebar. Thank you for humoring me on that one.
So the other thing I talked to my cousin about was his body. Like, he just melted away, right? Like his muscle, he was like yourself, fit, but he was just too thin. It was, as he was aging, I was saying, we know that it's important for longevity and vitality to have a certain amount of muscle, right? You need it. And so in his case, again, when you get the wrong micronutrients or not enough of them, supplementing properly, hormonally, he was in a very unique place where he needed to work out a lot more because he bled out his testosterone very quickly. So we had to work on that also. It wasn't so much about go eat meat. It was about, okay, let's supplement your lifestyle choice, your vegan choice, with the right exercise so that you're actually retaining the muscle, right? And then the last thing was that I talked to him about because of, and this is a few years ago, it's a little easier now, but a few years ago as a vegan, it was a carb heavy diet because you didn't have many options, right? And so that was another thing I had to deal with him on, to show him that to metabolize carbs, you first need to break down the carb into glucose to use it as fuel. He did a horrible job of that genetically. The gene that does that, he had the worst version. You then needed to trigger an insulin response, as part of that process. He had the worst version of that. So his insulin resistance was horrible. That combination would lead to, if you're going to be in a carb heavy diet, you're guaranteed to get type 2 diabetes. It's literally a guarantee. That's where it comes from, right? So we had to deal with that. So again, I didn't say you need to go eat meat. We had to say, let's adjust and reduce the carbs, and let's also not mix them with fats, because he was also a poor fat metabolizer, which is part of the reason he went on a vegan diet. So we did a number of things, and this is where it's not so much about vegan, not vegan, cardio, not cardio. It's about, okay, I have a goal and I have a certain wiring. How do I get there?
Yeah.
Take the trial and error out, take the one size fits all out. Tell me how I get to where I want to be.
So it sounds like your company provides more than just a report. It sounds like coaching and ongoing support as you make these behavior changes. Is that right?
That's the evolution of what people needed from us. So it used to be, here's this highly scientific report, which was very comprehensive. And if I showed it to you, you would probably get vertigo and fall over because it was so complex. But that was what we needed in terms of science to interpret and consult somebody, meaning that we would sit down with an hour clinically, those 6,000 people we talked about, and interpret that data. We said, okay, that's great, but how are we going to train armies and thousands of people to go do this en masse so that everybody gets benefited from this, not just the people that can see us, right? So we had to make it easy to use, which is these new reports that, first of all, speak to the phenotype, your genes are your genotype. Here's your list of genes. That's your genotype. What does that mean? My nose is this big. I have anxiety. I can't gain weight. That's your phenotype, right? What are the genes equal? So we speak to the phenotype. Our reports don't say this gene, this version. It says anxiety, weight loss, carb metabolization. People want to know what's wrong with me and how do I fix it? And yeah, if you can tell me about the genes, that's also great. But first, tell me what's going on, right? So we did that. And then we said, this is still not enough, because now that we've identified it and kind of wowed people in terms of, oh, that's why this was happening, they want to know how to fix it. And the how do I fix it part was Dr. BJ Fogg. He came in and said, it's about how, it's not, we already know how to fix it. But how do you actually get people to do those things? It's that behavioral change, those tiny habits he always talks about, and making things so easy. And when people read our reports now, literally the feedback we get is, oh, I already knew that. Because it's just so easy. It will say, well, did you do it?
Yeah.
Have you been doing this are you sick? Right? Okay, you didn't know it and you weren't doing it. So we're just making it easy for you to do it. But that's how easy BJ makes things to sort of digest.
So one thing I want to say about BJ's research and his approach that doesn't get enough emphasis, and it's just fabulous, is he coined the term for this particular emotion that didn't have a name before, and he calls it shine.
Oh,
That's
wow.
that feeling of success when you are making progress. That's is a feeling, right? And if you have an app or a tool that does not inject shine into the equation, it's going to fail. So I'll give you a specific example. I used to use an app on my iPhone called the Way of Life app. So Way of Life allowed me to keep track of and build a chain of success, right? Okay, I can put a green check in this box for this day. So I started adding more things because I was increasing the length of the chain. I don't know if you heard this story before, but Seinfeld, every day that he would write a joke, he would put an X on his calendar on the wall.
Huh.
And he would feel not great if he missed a day, because he'd break the chain and he'd have to start all over building a new chain. And so he would keep these long chains. That's what the Way of Life app is based on, that concept. So it's red if you didn't do it. It's green if you made it. So I would get all these green days in a row, and I'd feel very successful. I'd feel shine.
You
But
feel
what the
fine.
app didn't do was handle the misses where I fall off the wagon,
Right.
and it's theoretically easy for me to jump back on the wagon, but from a mental kind of head game standpoint, I would feel like a failure. Like I just went 30 days in a row and I just killed it. I just destroyed my streak. Now I start all over again. That sucks. And I don't even open the app then for a week. And then it
Right.
becomes 2 weeks, and then it's 3. So where's the shine to keep people on the wagon? And then if they fall off, to incentivize them to get back on the wagon. That's really, really crucial.
That's yeah. And this is where, so we didn't know that word, right? But we intuitively were led to that was a piece that was needed, meaning, okay, we've told you kind of what's wrong. Here's your DNA. We've told you what to do about it. And we've even told you how to do it, the behavioral changes. But where's that trigger that, kind of like you said, where's the shine? And so what we brought on, exactly as you said, these health coaches, which was never a part of our business. As a biotech science company, you would think, what does a health coach know about DNA? And it's kind of even the entitlement of the scientists. Why are we working with health coaches? Show me a PhD, right? So we said no, that they have a skill that we don't have, which is to draw people towards their goals, to help them manage and adopt these small habits and changes, and feel rewarded at the end of the day when they get there. Like, here's the checkbox. We got there. We completed this thing. Now let's go work on something else. So that's our sort of solution to that and answer is we brought these coaches on because we've understood that everybody that gets through the process, it's always there calling, saying, how do I get more? How do I talk to somebody? How do I? They want somebody to concierge handhold them through getting better. Right. And that's the end of that tunnel is the shine. That's the reward of, I did it. I sleep better now. We actually had that a few weeks ago. A friend of mine, I actually sent him our new reports. I said, take a look at this. We already had his DNA. And so I said, look at our news reports and just tell me what you think. We're looking for feedback. And he said, wow, I sleep now. I said, I didn't even know you had a sleeping issue. He said, I didn't know either. He said, I didn't realize that's why I feel so screwed up all the time. And I just figured that people don't sleep, whatever. So anyways, it was identified. He read the report. He started making tiny changes like turning off his blue light on his phone, closing his laptop, putting on blue light filter glasses, not doing his work until 5 minutes before sleep. And all of a sudden he was sleeping properly.
Awesome.
Right. And there was that coaching trigger to make sure he actually did those things.
Yep.
So anyways, putting it all together, you're right on the money that's what people sort of need.
Yeah. Because the prescription is one thing. And if you have enough motivation, BJ's behavioral model, the FOG behavioral model, has behavior, B equals MAP, motivation times ability times the prompt. And you could just power through stuff. You have really high motivation. You don't have to have as much of an ability or the prompt, and you can just power through it. Now, one thing that I'm in the midst of doing is a metabolic reset. It's a 45-day metabolic reset. I may be able to get it down to 30 days because it's really not fun. I'm looking forward to finishing this thing. There's no carbs at all, no oils, and just 600, 700 calories of protein in an 8-hour window twice a day. So like 11 a.m. and then 6, 7 p.m. And 4 ounces of veggies, 4 ounces of fruits, and then some free veggies as well that are mostly water-based. I don't have to weigh. So I do that every day, and I'm about 10 days into it. And it is really difficult, and my blood sugar is not in range. It's low a lot.
Oh,
And
okay.
I know I need to do something different. I'm getting coaching from Sachin Patel, who was a guest on this episode.
Right.
I'm a guest on this podcast a while back, but I'm concerned. Like I'm in the red. It's 3.7 all the way down to 3.0. And I forget the it's not in the usual format.
So Sachin actually works with us. He's been a huge supporter for us.
Oh, I love Sachin.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's one of the best guys out there in the functional medicine
So he's
space.
telling me to go get some fresh air, get some sunlight, take my shirt off in the sun, and get some light exercise. And I haven't been exercising as much other than just a little bit of walking. So, but not overdoing it because I'm not supposed to go hit the gym or whatever while I'm on this metabolic reset.
Okay.
So I'm curious to hear if you had any thought about, like, maybe there might be a genetic component here that is
Definitely.
why. Okay, tell me more.
Could be one of a few things. And by the way, Sachin actually uses our testing, so he may be able to sort of incorporate it into your program if you need. But there's multiple things. So the first thing Sachin said about the sun and vitamin D. Vitamin D is highly misunderstood. You go to the doctor, take a blood test. Hey, you have enough vitamin D. Well, guess what? Vitamin D in the blood doesn't mean utilization of vitamin D. There's 3 steps genetically. There's drawing it from the blood or food and putting it into, or sorry, drawing it from the sun, or food and putting it into the blood. Some people do that okay, some people don't. Then there's transporting it to the cell where it's actually used. That's an entirely separate genetic process. Then there's actually binding it once it reaches the cell. All 3 of those can have good, medium, bad versions. And if you're bad across the board, the way your relationship with vitamin D is very different than it is for someone who's good across the board. Vitamin D, of the 22,000 genes in your body, 2,000 of them require vitamin D to function.
Wow. And vitamin D is essential to having COVID resilience as well.
Yeah. And this is why it's not quite understood. It's considered, your immunity gene. It's because imagine if 10% of your trillions of cells and 10% of your biochemistry is just failing because this one key that unlocks everything is just not there. Right. So that's one of the first things we usually go to that resolves so much. My niece's anxiety problem is gone because of vitamin D. When did it start? When COVID started and she was doing school at home and didn't go outside anymore. Right. It was literally just lack of vitamin D. That was her problem, and some hormonal issues layered on top of that. But that would be a place to start. Then there's just metabolic rate. So there's one gene that determines how quickly or slowly you metabolize, right? And also how quickly and slowly you adjust, in your body moving from this diet to that diet, etc., and all the different sort of cogs and wheels being triggered, and so there's several things you would look at. And this is where we can probably predict what it is. We can ask you 10 questions and probably figure out what it is. But genetically, we could literally pinpoint and say, here's what's going on. This is what you need to change.
I think I need to do your test. Now, I understand that you have a special offer for our listener and viewer, and it's at a special URL, and you get a price discount. So do you want to share that with our listeners?
Sure. So we're going to be at the Biohacking conference, and that's we connected through them, and they suggested we should speak. And our community I believe we should all keep talking and getting tighter and growing our missions together. In terms of your community, we said, since we're coming on the show, let's put something together for everybody. If you go to the website, thednacompany.com/optimized, and you purchase the 360 report, which is the core one we've been talking about, at checkout, you'll see a $50 discount, right? And that's credit back to your show. Like, you've organized that for everybody, meaning because of this podcast, we've set that up. Otherwise, we don't really discount. But so that's at dnacompany.com/optimized, and you'll see at checkout a $50 discount. And we hope that it means a lot more than the $50 discount, that you really truly change your life, and gain a lot more than that out of it. But you're welcome to take advantage of that.
That's awesome. And speaking of the Biohacking Congress, it's coming up in Miami on October 16th and 17th. There's also a special offer code for that. It's HACK50. You get 50% off tickets either on site or live stream. And the website is biohackingcongress.com. And you're going to be speaking, and some really amazing other speakers will be on the docket as well. So I'll be there. Hopefully you, listener, will be there as well. And I'll see you, Kashif, at that event. Now, one last thing: if our listener or viewer wants to learn more from you, because you are a wealth of information and, frankly, wisdom. What's the best way they can learn from you? Just follow you on social media? Do you have a
Yeah,
blog? Is
I mean,
there a
we can share.
podcast?
We've just so as a science company, we haven't been outwardly promoting much. So we just recently started. And so our social media, we've just started posting a bunch of videos that are educating, and people are going crazy. We just posted a video yesterday about video game addiction and why it actually happens and what you can do about it.
Wow.
And
I'm going to include that in the show notes for this episode. That sounds really
sure.
fascinating.
Yeah, it was awesome. So it was just a huge pickup. I hardly have any followers, but there's thousands and thousands of people watching it because it's so resonant to them, right? So anyway, so we'll share the social media tags and all that, and people can start to learn.
Awesome. And again, the website URL is thednacompany.com, and the special offer is at thednacompany.com/optimized.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kashif. And
Thank you.
thank you, listener. And I hope that you make some behavior changes that change your life and your health. And we'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.
Awesome.